Victor Harlow stood motionless in his penthouse apartment, his steel-gray eyes fixed on the meticulously arranged dinner table. 25 years of marriage shone in the gleam of fine china and crystal glasses. The bottle of 1982 Lafite Rothschild, Serena's favorite, waited unopened, a silent testament to his attention to detail. At precisely 7 o'clock, the elevator doors opened. Serena's Louboutin heels clicked against the marble floor with deliberate finality. She wore a new Oscar de la Renta dress with the price tag still attached, a detail that did not escape Victor's notice. "Really, Victor? You thought we'd have a romantic dinner?" Serena's voice dripped with disdain as she surveyed the setup. Victor maintained his composure as he studied the woman whose face he had woken up to for 25 years, a face that now held nothing but contempt. "I thought we could discuss things civilly." Serena laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. She reached into her designer handbag and produced a thick envelope. "There's nothing to discuss," she declared, tossing the envelope onto the table and scattering the rose petals Victor had so carefully arranged. "Happy anniversary, darling." Victor picked up the envelope with measured, controlled movements. Inside were divorce papers, meticulously prepared and waiting for his signature. He scanned the documents, his expression unchanging. "You didn't think I'd stay with a small-time financial analyst forever, did you?" Serena moved to the bar, helping herself to a glass of champagne. "Julian's Newport mansion makes this place look like a storage unit," she said dismissively. "Damien Carlyle," Victor replied quietly, still reading the papers. "CEO of Carlyle Dynamics. Quite the upgrade." "Oh, you have no idea." Serena smiled, twirling her glass. "We've been together for over a year now. He knows how to treat a woman of my caliber." She paused, savoring each word. "And he's helped me make some very smart financial decisions." Victor finally looked up from the papers. "The joint accounts, all legally transferred, darling." Check page 6. Serena's smile widened. "Damien's lawyers are excellent. You'll find everything's perfectly in order." A memory flashed through Victor's mind. His first day as a junior broker, analyzing market trends until his eyes burned, identifying patterns others missed. The very patterns that had built his fortune, the fortune that Serena had just attempted to dismantle. "You've been busy," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Someone had to be. God knows you were always too wrapped up in your pathetic little market analyses." Serena drained her glass. "Do you know what Damien said when I told him about your anniversary plans?" she asked with a hint of amusement. He laughed. Actually laughed. Victor placed the papers back on the table. "And what else does Damien find amusing?" "Everything about you, darling. Your sad little attempts at being a big player in the financial world. Your obsession with control." She walked closer, her new, expensive, unfamiliar perfume filling the space between them. "You want to know the best part? While you were busy playing with your spreadsheets, Damien and I were planning our future, in your bed most of the time." Victor remained still, his face a mask of indifference, though behind his eyes something dark and calculating stirred. "Nothing to say," he finally murmured. "No tearful pleas. No angry outbursts. God, you're pathetic." Serena taunted. "Julian's waiting for me. Enjoy your sad little life, loser." As Serena turned to leave, she missed the slight smile that crossed Victor's face, a smile that would have given her pause had she seen it, a smile that spoke of secret knowledge and plans already in motion. The elevator doors closed behind her, and Victor walked to his study. He opened his laptop and clicked on a folder labeled Insurance. Inside were hundreds of photographs. Serena entering Damien's office at odd hours, their secret meetings, their not-so-discreet exchanges in various locations, each meticulously dated and catalogued. He opened another folder containing financial records, transaction histories, and corporate documents. Every move Serena and Damien had made tracked and analyzed. The private investigator's reports were thorough, dating back months, but they merely confirmed what Victor had long suspected. His phone buzzed. A text from Graham Eldridge, his trusted associate. Everything in place. Victor typed back, proceeding as planned. He closed the laptop and returned to the dining room. The divorce papers lay exactly where Serena had thrown them, a final act of disrespect. Victor picked them up, straightened the pages, and placed them carefully in his briefcase. Another memory surfaced, his first major market prediction, the one that had set him on his path to wealth. He had seen the pattern when no one else had. He had moved his assets at precisely the right moment. The same skills that had made him rich would now serve a different purpose. Victor looked at his reflection in the window. The man staring back was not defeated. He was awakened. Serena had made a fatal mistake. She had assumed his quiet nature meant weakness. She had mistaken his patience for passivity. She would learn, as others had before her, that still waters run deep and dangerous. At that moment, the shadowed observer emerged. Graham Eldridge stood in Victor's private office, watching his friend and employer arrange documents on his desk. The space reflected its owner. Precise, organized, purposeful. Every item had its place, every document its significance. Graham asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. Most of them. Only the ones Serena knew about, Victor replied casually. Graham's eyes narrowed. The ones she knew about. Victor looked up, a predatory gleam in his eyes. Did you really think I'd keep all my assets and accounts accessible to her? You know me better than that, Graham. How long have you known about the affair? 7 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days, Graham answered. Victor pulled up a series of documents on his computer, the exact duration of Operation Shadow. Graham moved closer to the desk. Operation Shadow. Take a look. Victor turned the screen toward Graham. Graham's eyes widened as he scanned the documents. Ownership records, shell companies, proxy shareholders. A complex web of financial maneuvers that all led to one conclusion. Good heavens, Victor, Graham whispered. You own Carlyle Dynamics. 51% controlling interest. Acquired through various shell companies over the past 2 years. Damien's enormous ego made it easy. He never bothered to look closely at his institutional investors. The cost, the logistics, the spare pennies I could afford, the contacts I had cultivated, the favors I could call in. Victor's voice remained steady. While Damien was busy with Serena, I was buying his company out from under him, piece by piece. Graham sank into a chair. Does anyone else know? Only my lawyers, and they're very well compensated for their discretion, Victor declared. Victor then walked to the window. Damien thinks he's taking everything from me. He has no idea he's been dancing to my tune for months. A knock at the door interrupted them. Victor's assistant entered briskly. Sir, Detective Miranda Cruz is here for your appointment. Perfect timing, Victor murmured. Send her in. Detective Miranda Cruz entered the office with the confident stride of someone accustomed to commanding respect. Her sharp eyes took in every detail of the room before settling on Victor. Mr. Harlow, she said, extending her hand. Thank you for meeting with me. Please, have a seat. Victor gestured toward a chair. This is Graham Eldridge, my associate. Detective Cruz nodded. I'm investigating some allegations regarding Carlyle Dynamics. She began pulling out a notebook. Given your personal connection to the situation, I hoped you might have some insights. Victor's expression shifted subtly, a hint of vulnerability replacing his usual mask of control. Personal connection. Ah, you mean my wife's affair with Damien Carlyle. Detective Cruz watched him carefully. Ex-wife now. I understand. As of today, Victor's voice cracked slightly. 25 years of marriage ended with divorce papers on our anniversary. Quite the dramatic timing, wouldn't you say? Mr. Harlow, I'm more interested in any knowledge you might have of Carlyle Dynamics business practices. Detective, until today my only concern was trying to save my marriage. Victor ran a hand through his hair, a perfect picture of a man struggling with personal tragedy. I'm afraid I wasn't paying much attention to Damien Carlyle's business dealings. Graham watched the performance with hidden admiration. Every gesture and word was calculated to present the image of a broken man, too consumed by personal pain to be capable of corporate manipulation. We've received reports of irregular financial activities. Detective Cruz pressed. Large sums moving through unusual channels. That would be my wife's work, Victor said bitterly. She's cleared out our joint accounts. But I assume that's not what you're investigating. Detective Cruz made a note. No, this goes deeper. There are suggestions of systematic fraud within the company structure itself. How unfortunate, Victor murmured. Though I suppose a man capable of destroying a marriage wouldn't hesitate to bend other rules as well. The detective studied him for a long moment. Mr. Harlow, if you think of anything that might be relevant to our investigation, please contact me. She handed him her card. After Detective Cruz left, Graham turned to Victor. She suspects something. Of course she does. She's excellent at her job, Victor replied, picking up the detective's card. And she'll be very useful when the time comes. The anonymous tip, one of many breadcrumbs I've arranged. Damien's own records will condemn him. I've just made sure the right people are looking in the right places. Graham shook his head in amazement. You've thought of everything. When you hunt a predator, you have to think like one. Victor pulled up another set of documents on his computer. Now, let's review the next phase. Damien is about to make a crucial mistake, and we need to be ready. At Damien's Newport office window, he admired his reflection in the glass. His custom Tom Ford suit fit perfectly, a visual reminder of his success. Behind him, Serena lounged on his leather sofa, scrolling through luxury real estate listings on her tablet. The Hamilton Manor is having an open house next weekend, she said. 12 bedrooms, indoor pool, private tennis court, perfect for our housewarming party. Damien smiled indulgently, thinking, big plans, aren't we? Always. Serena set down the tablet. You should see Victor's face when I dropped the divorce papers. Complete shock. He actually had dinner prepared, candles, roses, the whole pathetic display. Amateur. Damien scoffed. Speaking of amateurs, how much did you manage to transfer? Everything in the joint accounts, Serena replied triumphantly. Your lawyers were right. Damien's smile was triumphant. He never saw it coming. Too busy with his precious market analyses to notice what was happening right under his nose. A knock at the door interrupted them. Bernard Walsh, Damien's CFO, entered looking concerned. Damien, we need to talk. Damien's tone hardened. Bernard, if there's anything you need to say it in front of Serena. Sir, we're observing unusual movement from our major institutional investors, Bernard said, glancing at Serena privately. They're asking questions about our Q3 projections. Questions? Damien's tone sharpened. What kind of questions? About our revenue streams, our subsidiary operations. Very specific questions. Handle it. Damien snapped. That's what I pay you for. Sir, with all due respect, these aren't regular inquiries. Someone's been feeding them detailed financial records and transaction histories that should not be accessible to outsiders. Damien's face darkened. Are you implying something about my business practices, Bernard? No, sir. I'm saying someone else is. Bernard placed a folder on the desk. These documents were anonymously sent to several of our major shareholders. Damien snatched the folder, his face reddening as he read. This is impossible. These records are sealed. Nobody has access to this information. Apparently, somebody does, Bernard said quietly. Find out who. Damien growled, slamming the folder down. And shut them down, whatever it costs. After Bernard left, Serena moved to Damien's side. What does this mean? She asked breathlessly. It means we need to move faster. Damien reached for his phone. Get the IPO team in here. We're going public ahead of schedule. Is that wise? Serena asked, concerned about the company's finances. Perfect timing, Damien insisted. Once we're public, these records become old news. We'll have fresh capital and new investors. Anyone questioning our past dealings will be drowned out by our future success. Neither of them noticed the tiny red light blinking on Damien's desk phone, transmitting every word to a secure server in Victor's office. Later that evening, Detective Cruz sat at her desk reviewing financial documents. The anonymous tips had started arriving 3 months ago, each one more detailed than the last, each pointing to specific irregularities in Carlisle Dynamics operations. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Check the offshore transfers for March 15th. She pulled up the relevant files, and as her eyes widened while connecting the dots, whispered, "Got you." Unaware that she was playing her part in a much larger game, she continued her work. In his own office, Victor watched multiple screens displaying surveillance feeds from Damien's office, streams of financial data, and Detective Cruz's case notes, all obtained through carefully cultivated sources. "Their arrogance makes them careless," he commented to Graham, who stood nearby. "Damien's rushing the IPO, just as we predicted, and Serena still thinks she's won." Victor's smile was cold. "Let them celebrate while they can. The storm is about to break, and they don't even see it coming." The pieces were in place. The trap was set. All that remained was to watch his enemies walk right into it, their own hubris leading them to their destruction. Victor had learned long ago that revenge, like any successful investment, required patience, planning, and perfect timing, and he had all three in abundance. In the boardroom of Carlisle Dynamics, Damien stood at the head of a mahogany table. His expensive suit and confident smile projected the image of a man in complete control. Board members and major investors filled the seats, their attention focused on the presentation screen displaying the IPO proposal. "Ladies and gentlemen," Damien began, "today marks the beginning of a new era for Carlisle Dynamics. Our decision to go public will position us as—" "Mr. Carlisle," Bernard Walsh interrupted a board member, handing him a note. "There's something urgent you need to see." Damien's smile faltered slightly as he read the message. "Perhaps we should take a brief recess." The boardroom doors opened, and Graham Eldridge entered, followed by a team of lawyers carrying document boxes. "Please continue, Mr. Carlisle," Graham said, his voice resonating across the room. "This won't take long." Damien's eyes narrowed. "This is a private meeting." "Security." "Security won't be necessary," Graham replied calmly, placing a thick folder on the table. "I'm here representing the majority shareholder of Carlisle Dynamics." Murmurs rippled through the room. Damien laughed, though there was an edge to it. "I am the majority shareholder." "No, Mr. Carlisle," Graham countered as he distributed documents to each board member. "You own 37% of Carlisle Dynamics. The remaining shares are distributed among various institutional investors, or so you believed." Damien snatched a document, his face reddening as he read. "This is impossible." Over the past 2 years, Graham continued, addressing the board, these supposedly independent investment groups have been systematically acquired by Shell Corporation Omega, which is itself owned by Summit Holdings, and through a series of subsidiary companies is controlled by. The presentation screen flickered to life, revealing Victor Harlow's calm, focused expression. "Hello, Damien," Victor said. Damien stumbled backward. This is some kind of trick." "The only trick," Victor replied, his voice filling the room, "was making you believe you were untouchable. Share purchase, proxy vote, board appointment, all orchestrated to bring us to this moment." "You can't do this," Damien shouted. "I built this company. I bought it. Legally, systematically," Victor countered. "While you were busy stealing my wife, I was acquiring your life's work, piece by piece." Board members exchanged glances, papers rustling as they reviewed the documentation. "This is all perfectly legal," confirmed one lawyer. "Mr. Harlow owns 51% of Carlisle Dynamics through various shell corporations. All proper procedures were followed." Damien spun toward the board members. "You can't let him do this. I made you all rich." "Mr. Carlisle," a senior board member spoke, These documents also show concerning irregularities in the company's financial records, irregularities that will be thoroughly investigated. Graham added, and certain offshore accounts that might interest the SEC. Damien's face went pale. You're bluffing. Am I? Victor's voice was steel wrapped in silk. Check your phone, Damien. The FBI is currently executing search warrants at your private office and residence. As if on cue, Damien's phone buzzed with multiple messages. His hands trembled as he read them. You've lost, Damien, Victor continued. The company, the mansion, everything you built on lies and betrayal. Consider it the price of stealing what's mine. I'll fight this, Damien snarled. I'll tie you up in court for years. With what money? Victor asked coolly. Your personal accounts have been frozen pending investigation. Every lawyer in New York has been contacted and warned that representing you would be unwise. Face it, Damien, you're finished. At the back of the boardroom, Detective Cruz watched silently, her notebook forgotten in her hand. The pieces were falling into place. The anonymous tips, the financial irregularities, the perfectly timed revelations. She had been playing a part in someone else's grand design all along. Graham then addressed Damien. Security will escort you from the building. Your access has been revoked, and your personal items will be shipped to you. Damien looked around desperately, finding no allies among the faces he once commanded. His empire was crumbling, and the architect of his destruction was not even there to witness it in person. Serena, he gasped. I need to warn. Ms. Harlow's access has also been revoked, Graham informed him. I believe she's about to receive some rather unpleasant news of her own. As security led Damien away, his protests echoing down the corridor, Graham turned to address the board. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Harlow has prepared a detailed presentation on the company's new direction. Shall we begin? At Damien's former Newport mansion, now a scene of chaos, security teams were changing locks while forensic accountants boxed documents. Serena Harlow stood in the grand foyer, her designer outfit clashing with the pandemonium around her. You can't do this, she repeated, clutching her Hermes bag like a shield. This is my home. Actually, Mrs. Harlow, the head of security consulted his tablet. According to property records, this house belongs to Summit Holdings, a subsidiary of. I know who owns it. Serena snapped. Where's Damien? He'll sort this out. Mr. Carlyle is currently unavailable, the security chief replied, and you have 30 minutes to collect essential personal items. The rest will be inventoried and stored pending legal resolution. Serena's phone buzzed. A message from her bank made her blood run cold. My accounts, they're frozen. All of them. A suited man approached, holding a document. I represent the law firm handling your divorce settlement. Given recent developments, Mr. Harlow is exercising his right to contest the financial terms. All assets are frozen pending review. She can't do that. Serena cried out. I earned that money by draining our joint accounts without disclosure. The lawyer raised an eyebrow. The courts may see it differently. Also, given Damien's legal situation, any assets transferred from him to you are subject to investigation. Serena's designer heels clicked across the marble floor as she paced. I need to call my lawyer. Your lawyer's firm has withdrawn representation, the man informed her, citing a conflict of interest. In his office, Victor watched the scene unfold on multiple screens. Graham reported, Damien is being processed by the FBI. The evidence is overwhelming once they knew where to look. His lawyers are abandoning him faster than rats from a sinking ship. And Serena? Complete asset freeze. No access to accounts, credit cards canceled. All property seized pending investigation. She's got only the cash in her purse and the clothes on her back. Victor nodded coolly. What about the job arrangements? Done. Graham replied. Damien's Uber application has been approved. It's the only job he'll be able to get with his ruined reputation. And Serena's position at that mall clothing store starts Monday. Minimum wage, of course. Perfect, Victor said with icy satisfaction. Let them experience life without their precious status. Let them know what it's like to struggle to be looked down upon. On the screen, Serena was being escorted to the street, her protests falling on deaf ears. Her phone rang. Damien was calling from a borrowed phone after his FBI questioning. "Damien, they're taking everything." His voice cracked. "The company, the money, everything." "Victor," he managed. "I planned this all along," Victor replied smoothly. "Fix this," Serena demanded. "You promised me a life of luxury." I can't even afford a hotel room. My cards are all declined. I'm calling from a payphone." The line went dead. Serena stood on the sidewalk as her world collapsed around her. A passing taxi splashed water on her designer shoes. Shoes she bought with money stolen from her ex-husband. Money she would never have again. In his office, Victor watched her distress with cold detachment. He sent her the job offer and instructed Graham, "Make it clear it's the only position she'll be able to get in this city." "You're not just taking their money," Graham observed. "You're making them live like the people they once looked down upon." "They chose this," Victor replied softly. Betrayal. A cruel word. In the moments they spent mocking what they called my pathetic life, they chose it all. Now they must live with those choices. The security feed showed Serena trying desperately to book a hotel room. Card after card declined. Finally, she called the one person she thought might help her sister. "Tessa, I need a place to stay." "Tessa, please don't hang up." But the line was already dead. Victor had been thorough. Everyone in Serena's social circle had been quietly informed of her situation. No one wanted to risk their own status by associating with her. "Where will they go?" Graham asked. "Damien has a cousin in Brooklyn who might take him in," Victor said coolly. "And Serena, well, there's always the subway." The security feeds showed the final stages of the takeover. Damien's personal items were being boxed up, his life reduced to inventory lists. Serena's closet was being catalogued, her precious designer collection tagged and bagged as potential evidence. "Should we tell them about the criminal charges yet?" Graham asked. "Not yet," Victor replied. "Let them think this is the bottom. When the indictments come down next week, it will hurt that much more." At the transformed Newport mansion, a new beginning was taking shape. The once gaudy displays of wealth had vanished, replaced by warmth and purpose. The space now radiated comfort rather than ostentation. Lydia Weston moved through the rooms with quiet authority, directing contractors and organizers. Each space was being repurposed with clear intent: dormitories for single mothers, childcare facilities, and educational spaces. "The security system needs to be top-notch," she instructed the installation team. "Many of our residents will be escaping difficult situations. They need to feel safe here." A young woman with a small child approached tentatively. "Ms. Weston, I'm Teresa Bellwether, Tessa for short. The agency sent me." Lydia's face brightened with a genuine smile. "Of course. Welcome, Tessa. And who is this little one?" "This is Emma," Tessa replied, her daughter peeking shyly from behind her legs. "We really appreciate this opportunity. Please, come see your space." Lydia led them toward the residential wing. Each unit has its own bathroom and kitchenette. We provide childcare while mothers are working or studying, and there's a communal dining area for those who want to share meals. As they walked, Tessa's eyes widened at the facility's scope. "This must have cost a fortune to set up." "The owner believes in giving people second chances," Lydia replied gently. "Sometimes life takes unexpected turns, and everyone deserves support while they rebuild." In his private office, Victor watched the interaction on his security feed, his expression unreadable. Graham entered with fresh reports. Damien's first day as an Uber driver was interesting. 3 one-star reviews already. Apparently, he's not good at taking orders from passengers. "And Serena?" Graham continued. "She started her mall job today and had a meltdown when a customer demanded to speak to her manager. Security had to intervene." Victor nodded, his attention returning to the screen where Lydia was showing Tessa the childcare facility. The shelter's security. State-of-the-art. Full coverage, facial recognition, panic buttons in every room. Nobody gets in without proper clearance. Graham confirmed. Good, Victor said softly. These women have been through enough. They deserve to feel safe. A new figure appeared on the security feed. Detective Miranda Cruz, arriving for what appeared to be a casual visit. She and Lydia greeted each other warmly, clearly forging a genuine friendship. Izzy. Perfect timing. Lydia said with a smile. We're just showing our newest resident around. This is Tessa and Emma. Detective Cruz smiled warmly at the child. Hi, Emma. I'm Izzy. I help people who are having problems. Like a superhero? Emma asked, peeking out from behind her mother. Something like that. Izzy laughed. Sometimes people need someone to stand up for them and make things right. Lydia led them to the dining area where other mothers and children were gathering for lunch, a far cry from the cold, formal dinners Damien and Serena had once hosted. It's amazing, Izzy said to Lydia as they watched the families interact. But I have to ask, the owner of this place turned a mansion into a shelter. That's not something you see every day. Lydia nodded. Some people believe that justice can take many forms. Izzy's eyes narrowed slightly as she considered Lydia's words. In her mind, pieces of a puzzle were shifting, forming a new picture. Back in his office, Victor observed Detective Cruz's thoughtful expression. She's figuring it out, he told Graham. Is that a problem? Graham asked softly. No, Victor replied. Detective Cruz understands that justice and law aren't always the same thing. She's seen enough victims of circumstance to know that sometimes balance must be restored through other means. The security feed then showed Lydia saying goodbye to Izzy and returning to help Tessa and Emma settle into their new home. The contrast between the mansion's past and its present struck a chord even in Victor's carefully controlled heart. Sir, Graham hesitated, about Serena's request to volunteer at the shelter. Absolutely not. Victor's voice turned to ice. She doesn't get to ease her conscience by playing savior to these women. Let her learn what it really means to struggle, to be judged, to be found wanting. Some debts can never be repaid. Through the cameras, Victor watched Lydia organize an orientation session for new residents, her natural empathy drawing out even the most hesitant participants. She was everything Serena was not. Genuine, compassionate, focused on others rather than herself. Graham reported, the foundation paperwork is ready. Once you sign, the shelter becomes a permanent institution with guaranteed funding. Victor nodded. Make it happen. These women deserve more than temporary sanctuary. They deserve a real chance to rebuild their lives. On the security feed, Emma finally emerged from her shell, playing with other children in the newly established playroom. Tessa's eyes glistened with tears as she watched her daughter laugh for the first time in months. Sometimes, Victor murmured, destruction can lead to creation. They destroyed what I had, so I destroyed what they had. But from those ashes, something better can rise. Graham understood. This isn't just revenge. It's reconstruction. For every life Serena and Damien carelessly damage, you're helping another rise. The scales of justice, Victor mused, could build as well as break. Later, in Lydia's office at the women's shelter, as she reviewed donation records, a familiar name caught her eye. Clicking through several files, each revelation deepened her suspicion. The shelter's property records, funding sources, and the timing of the acquisition all pointed to one conclusion. She gathered the documents and headed to Victor's office, where he and Graham were discussing security upgrades. Both men looked up as she entered. Graham immediately said, I'll give you some privacy, moving toward the door. Stay, Lydia commanded firmly. I think you're part of this story too, Graham. She laid the documents on Victor's desk. This mansion belonged to Damien Carlyle and Serena Harlow before it became a shelter. The very same Damien Carlyle, whose company collapsed in a takeover scandal, And the same Serena Harlow, who, according to these marriage records, was once Serena Harlow. Victor studied her face, his expression unchanging. "You've been investigating." "I am thorough," Lydia replied. "Something Detective Cruz said made me curious about justice taking different forms." "And what have you concluded?" Victor's voice remained steady. "That my wife is either the most calculating revenge artist I've ever encountered or the most strategic philanthropist." Lydia spread out the papers. "The timing is too perfect. The shelter's establishment coincides exactly with Carlisle Dynamics' collapse. The property transfer, the funding structure, it's all connected." Graham shifted uncomfortably, but Victor raised a hand. "She deserves the truth, Graham." Turning to Lydia, he asked, "What else have you discovered? You were married for 25 years. Serena had an affair with Damien Carlisle. Tried to ruin you financially, and you outmaneuvered them all. You owned Carlisle Dynamics through shell companies and orchestrated their downfall. Is that all?" Victor inquired. "No," Lydia's eyes narrowed. "You arranged their current situations. Damien driving for Uber, Serena working retail. That's not coincidence. That's design. You stripped them of everything they valued. Status, wealth, power." Victor stood and walked to a wall safe. He entered a code and withdrew a thick file. "You want the whole truth? Here it is." For the next hour, he laid out the complete story. The anniversary dinner, the divorce papers, the calculated betrayal. He showed her surveillance photos, financial records, the entire architecture of his revenge. "You planned this for years," Lydia said quietly. "The moment I suspected their affair, you began preparing, not just to destroy them, but to ensure they'd never recover." Victor's voice carried no remorse. "They thought I was weak, pathetic. They believed their status made them untouchable. And now they understand true weakness, true humiliation." He met her gaze. "I don't expect you to approve." "I don't need to approve or disapprove," Lydia interrupted. "I need to understand." "Show me everything, Victor. No filters, no omissions." Graham retrieved more files, and Victor continued his explanation in detail. The manipulation of investors, the strategic leaks to Detective Cruz, the careful dismantling of Damien's and Serena's social networks. "You didn't just take their money," Lydia observed. "You isolated them, made sure no one would help them rebuild." "They chose their path," Victor replied bitterly. "Betrayal. Cruel word. Those were their choices. I simply ensured they faced the consequences." "And the shelter? Was that part of your revenge too?" Lydia asked softly. "No," Victor said for the first time with a hint of warmth. "That was you, your vision. I merely provided the means." Lydia absorbed this, her mind racing through the implications. "The women we help here, many of them have stories like yours. Betrayal, manipulation, abuse of trust." "Exactly," Victor affirmed. "So this isn't just revenge. It's restoration." She gestured toward the shelter's potted plants. "For every life they damage, we're helping another heal." Victor studied her face. "Does this change things between us? Do you think I'm horrified by your capacity for revenge?" Lydia smiled grimly. "I've worked with abuse survivors for years, Victor. I understand the difference between cruelty and justice." She stood and gathered the documents. "But I need to know one thing. Are we done with the past, or is there more to come?" "The foundation paperwork is being finalized," Victor replied. "The shelter will be permanent, with guaranteed funding. Beyond that," he shrugged. "Damien and Serena made their choices. They must live with the consequences." Lydia nodded slowly. "Then let's focus on the future. But no more secrets, Victor. I'm not Serena. I won't be managed or manipulated." "Of course not," Victor agreed, his eyes meeting hers. "You never could be." Later, in the shelter's main hall, the atmosphere buzzed as new residents gathered for an afternoon support group meeting. Children played in the supervised care area, and Lydia moved among them with quiet authority. The security system chimed, alerting everyone to a visitor on the monitor. At the gate stood Serena, now dressed in a modest mall uniform that contrasted sharply with her former designer wardrobe. "Ma'am," a security guard's voice crackled over the intercom, "this is a private facility. You need authorization." "Please," Serena's voice, stripped of its former aristocratic polish, pleaded, "I just want to speak to Lydia Weston, or Victor, please." Lydia watched the monitor, noting the transformation in the woman who had once sneered at ordinary people. Months of minimum wage work had stripped away her arrogance, replacing it with something approaching humility. "Let her wait," Victor said from behind Lydia. She hadn't heard him approach. "She looks different," Lydia observed. "Poverty has that effect." "No sympathy," Victor added coolly, "especially for those who once despised it." They watched as Serena shifted nervously at the gate. "I want to hear what she has to say," Lydia decided. Victor's jaw tightened. "She's manipulative." "Not you, Victor. I won't be fooled by false remorse," Lydia replied firmly. She pressed the intercom. "Security, escort her to my office." Full protocol. Serena was searched and scanned before being led through the shelter. In Lydia's office, she perched uncertainly on a chair. "Thank you for seeing me," she stammered. I've been trying to find a way to talk to someone." "Why are you here, Serena?" Lydia asked in a neutral tone. "I've seen the women who come here, their stories." Serena twisted her hands. "I want to help. Volunteer. Maybe try to make amends." "No." Victor stepped out from the shadows, causing Serena to flinch. "You don't get to ease your conscience here." "Please, Victor," Serena's voice cracked. "I know what I did was unforgivable." "Correct," Victor interrupted sharply. "You and Damien didn't just betray me. You mocked me, called my life pathetic while plotting to steal it. I was wrong." Tears spilled down Serena's cheeks. "I see that now. Working at the mall, living in that tiny apartment, I understand what real struggle is." "Wrong," Victor corrected. "You understand consequences. There's a difference." Lydia watched the exchange silently, noting how Serena's shoulders slumped under Victor's cold gaze. "The women here," Victor continued, "are survivors fighting to rebuild their lives. They don't need the entertainment of watching you perform public penance. This isn't a spectacle, isn't it?" Serena protested weakly. "You were content in your retail job when you thought no one was watching," Lydia said calmly. "It's only now, knowing about the shelter, that you suddenly feel charitable." Serena's face crumpled. I need something. A purpose. Damien is in prison. My friends won't speak to me. My family has turned their backs on me." "Your choices, Serena," Victor reminded her. "Your consequences." "How long?" Serena whispered. "How long do I have to pay?" "That's the thing about consequences, Serena," Victor said, moving to stand behind Lydia's chair. "They're not punishment. They're reality. This is your life now. Accept it." Lydia leaned forward. "The women here aren't props for your redemption story. They're rebuilding their lives with dignity and courage, qualities you might consider developing." Security then escorted Serena out. Through the monitors, Victor and Lydia watched her walk away, shoulders slumped in defeat. "You're still angry," Lydia observed softly. "Not angry. Resolved," Victor replied, touching her shoulder lightly. "Some debts can never be repaid. Some trust can never be rebuilt." Tessa appeared in the doorway. "Lydia, the new residents are ready for orientation." "Coming," Lydia said, then turned to Victor. "The past is done. Let's focus on those we can actually help." In Victor's home office, now transformed into a command center, one wall displayed shelter statistics, occupancy rates, success stories, and employment numbers. Another showed Carlisle Dynamics' transformation under new management, its resources redirected toward ethical ventures. Lydia entered carrying coffee and foundation documents. The board approved everything. The shelter's funding is guaranteed for the next 20 years. Good, Victor said as he signed the papers without hesitation. What about the expansion plans? 3 new locations have been identified. Lydia replied, pulling up the proposals. All in areas with high need and good access to resources. Graham arrived with additional reports. Damien's appeal was denied. He'll serve his full sentence. And Serena? Still at the mall. Her manager says she's actually becoming a decent employee, less entitled. Victor nodded, unsurprised. And the foundation structure? Ironclad, Lydia confirmed. Even if something happened to us, the shelters would continue. The women we help will always have support. She studied Victor's face. You really thought this through, didn't you? Making sure your revenge created something lasting. The best revenge isn't in destruction, Victor replied softly. It's transformation. They tried to destroy what I built. I used that to build something better. Speaking of building, Lydia said, pulling out another document. I was thinking, we've been so focused on work. Maybe it's time for a break. Victor raised an eyebrow. A break. 2 weeks, just us. Somewhere without spreadsheets or security feeds. The shelter is running perfectly, Lydia assured him. Tessa has really stepped up as coordinator. Graham can handle any emergencies. Climbing onto his desk, Lydia continued, we've built something amazing here, but we deserve time to enjoy it. Victor was quiet for a moment. Where would you want to go? Anywhere. Everywhere. Lydia smiled. We've spent so much time helping others rebuild. It's time we focus on building our own happiness too. I'm happy, Victor said simply. This work, this life with you, it's more than revenge now. It's purpose. Then let's celebrate that purpose, Lydia declared, pulling up travel destinations. 2 weeks. No business. No revenge. No past. Just us. Victor looked at the screens around them. The shelter statistics showing lives being rebuilt, the foundation documents ensuring continuity, even the Carlisle Dynamics reports demonstrating transformation from greed to genuine value. You're right, he decided. The past is settled. The future is secure. He stood and pulled Lydia close. Let's focus on now. Graham cleared his throat from the doorway. I'll have my team start travel arrangements. Any preferences? Somewhere we've never been. A fresh start. Lydia suggested. Victor smiled. A fresh start. But not a soft one. Never that. Lydia laughed. Never that. You're still you, just with better priorities. They spent the evening planning their trip while reviewing the shelter's progress. Every success story, every woman who rebuilt her life, was a testament to transformation. From the ashes of betrayal, something stronger had risen. The Phoenix Gambit, Lydia mused, echoing what Detective Cruz had once called Victor's takeover strategy. It's about rising from destruction, using pain to fuel rebirth. For everyone except Damien and Serena. Victor, she added softly. Some people don't deserve a Phoenix moment. No, Victor agreed. Some people simply deserve consequences. Lydia studied the shelter statistics. But our consequences created opportunities for others. A different kind of justice. Victor pulled her close. A better kind. The kind that builds instead of breaks. Together, they watched the shelter's evening routine on the security feeds. Women who had once been broken were now finding strength. Children who had known fear were learning to laugh. Even Graham, ever vigilant, was smiling as he reviewed the day's reports. The Phoenix had risen, not through forgiveness or forgetting, but through transformation. Justice had been served not merely through punishment, but through creation. 5 years later, at the Autumn Gala for the Harlow Foundation, New York City's elite gathered at the renovated Grand Atrium to celebrate 5 years of transforming lives through a network of women's shelters that had grown from a single mansion to 12 locations across 3 states. Lydia Harlow moved through the crowd with practiced ease, her quiet confidence matching her husband's power. She had just finished announcing their latest initiative, a scholarship program for shelter residents pursuing higher education. At one of the tables, Tessa Bellwether, now the Foundation's program director, sat with her daughter Ella, who at 12 was already talking about becoming a lawyer like Detective Cruz. They had come so far from their first days at the shelter. Tessa had not only rebuilt her life, but she had helped countless others do the same. Detective Miranda Cruz, recently promoted to captain, joined their table. She had become an integral part of the Foundation's legal advocacy program, helping women navigate the justice system with expertise and empathy. "The stats from my office are encouraging," she told Tessa. "Conviction rates are up 30% since we implemented the witness support program." Graham Eldridge, still Victor's right hand, and now the Foundation's chief of security, supervised his team with characteristic thoroughness. 5 years had added gray to his temples, but his vigilance had not diminished. He noticed everything, even the woman watching the gala from across the street. Serena Harlow stood in her modest mall uniform, having just finished her shift. 5 years of retail work had permanently erased her former aristocratic posture. Her once manicured hands were now worn from folding clothes and restocking shelves. Though a restraining order still kept her away from the Harlow residence, sometimes she came just to watch through the windows. She could see her ex-husband standing with Lydia. Their body language revealed the easy intimacy of a strong marriage. Over the years, Victor had only grown more powerful. Carlisle Dynamics, now renamed Harlow Enterprises, had become a force for corporate responsibility, its profits funding both the Foundation and new ethical business ventures. Serena's phone buzzed with a text from her supervisor about covering an extra shift tomorrow. She needed the money. Her tiny apartment in Brooklyn barely covered utilities, and her credit was still ruined. No one in her former social circle would even take her calls anymore. A few blocks away, Damien Carlisle sat in his parked Uber between rides on the night shift. Prison had aged him considerably, and his release had brought no relief. The ankle monitor ensured he stuck to his approved routes, while restitution payments devoured most of his earnings. His dating app profile garnered no matches. Women tended to Google potential dates, and his troubled history was out there for everyone to see. Back at the gala, Victor stood at the podium to announce the Foundation's latest expansion. 5 years ago, we made a promise, his authoritative voice declared. We promised to transform tragedy into triumph, to help women rebuild their lives after betrayal and abuse. Today, I am pleased to announce our expansion into the Windy City and the City of Angels. Applause filled the room as success stories from the shelters sat proudly among the guests. Women who had arrived broken had become business owners, educators, and healthcare workers. Their children, once traumatized by instability, were thriving in schools and extracurricular activities. The Foundation's work, Victor continued, is proof that the strongest steel is forged in the hottest fires. Every woman who rebuilds her life, every child who regains their smile, every family restored to stability. That is the true measure of success. Lydia joined him at the podium, cradling their 3-year-old daughter, Mia, a perfect blend of Victor's analytical mind and Lydia's compassionate heart. Meanwhile, Serena turned away from the window. Her efficiency rating at work was dropping, and she couldn't afford another demotion. Her walk to the subway station took her past familiar landmarks, restaurants she could no longer afford, shops where she had once been a valued customer. Her tiny apartment, with its leaky faucet and noisy radiator, awaited her. On her nightstand lay a letter from Damien, a bitter missive about his latest parole restrictions. They hadn't seen each other since his release. Their relationship had not survived their fall from grace. Damien's Uber app pinged with another ride request. Friday nights were busy, and he needed every dollar. His previous passenger had recognized him, making snide comments about that corrupt CEO who had gotten what he deserved. He had learned to stay silent and endure the humiliation. His attempts to find better work had all failed. Victor's influence ensured that his reputation remained toxic in the business world. Back at the gala, Graham approached Victor with his tablet. "Serena is outside again, just watching. And Damien, He's still working his usual route. The tracking system shows him staying within boundaries. Victor nodded, unsurprised. The new shelter locations, all properties secured through shell companies, with no traceable connections. Lydia, overhearing, touched Victor's arm. Still protecting everyone. Always, she said softly. Her smile meant only for him. Speaking of protection, how's the London expansion? On schedule. Tessa is flying out next month to train the new staff, Victor replied. Across the room, Ella was showing Detective Cruz her latest school project, a presentation on women's legal rights. The little girl, once shy behind her mother, now spoke with confidence, her future bright with possibilities. Captain Cruz, your network makes prosecution possible, Victor remarked as they approached. Women feel safe testifying when they know they're protected. Detective Cruz responded warmly. Tessa joined them, her professional attire a far cry from her first days at the shelter. The new job training program is at capacity. We're already looking at expanding the hours, she said. They discussed future plans, new shelters, expanded services, and stronger support networks. The foundation had become a model for similar programs nationwide. Other organizations now sought their guidance, trying to replicate their success. Later that night, after the gala, Victor and Lydia stood in their penthouse apartment. Maya slept peacefully in her room, surrounded by books and dreams. Through the window, they could see the city lights, the very same view Victor had once shared with Serena, but now seen through entirely different eyes. Any regrets? Lydia asked softly, though she already knew the answer. About us, Victor replied firmly. We chose our path. Our consequences are ours to bear. And this path, the foundation, the shelters, all of it, is our choice together. He drew her close. From our betrayal, we built something lasting, something meaningful. Meanwhile, in her cramped apartment, Serena ate a microwave dinner alone, watching entertainment news coverage of the gala. An old photograph of herself, once a disgraced socialite, briefly appeared on screen before she quickly changed the channel. Damien's night shift continued. Each new passenger reminded him of his fall. The same people he had once looked down upon now held power over his rating, his income, and his freedom. His ankle monitor blinked steadily, a constant reminder of his chains. The foundation's lights stayed on late into the night. Shelter staff worked around the clock. Women seeking safety found strength instead. Children learned to trust again, and families rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal. Graham's security team maintained their vigilance. Tessa prepared training materials for the London shelter, and Detective Cruz reviewed cases, finding new ways to protect vulnerable witnesses. The machine Victor had built from his revenge continued growing, strengthening, and helping. In their home office, Victor and Lydia reviewed plans for the next 5 years. More shelters, expanded services, stronger support networks. Their daughter Mia slept soundly, her future secure in what Serena had once taken for granted. The board meeting is tomorrow, Lydia reminded him. London expansion details are already prepared. Victor's efficiency remained undiminished. The new funding structure ensures stability, he said. They worked late into the night, building their legacy, not of revenge, though that sweetness lingered, but of transformation. They had taken betrayal's bitter ashes and forged something unbreakable. Outside, the city moved to its own rhythm. Serena turned off her lights, resigned to another day of struggle and diminished dignity. Damien logged off his app, counting meager tips. Meanwhile, shelter residents slept safely, their dreams finally peaceful. The phoenix had risen, its wings spread wide. From one man's meticulously executed revenge, countless lives found redemption. Not through forgiveness, but through transformation. Not through forgetting, but through building. Victor had proven that revenge, when properly executed, could build as well as destroy. His power had grown, his influence expanded, and his legacy was secured, not through forgiveness, for he had never offered that, but through transformation. The night deepened. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new lives to rebuild. The Foundation's work continued, its mission clear. From the ashes of betrayal, something magnificent had risen. And somewhere in Brooklyn, in her tiny apartment, Serena lay awake, remembering all she had lost. In a modest rented room, Damien counted his meager earnings. Their choices had condemned them to lives of struggle, their betrayal earning eternal consequences. But in their penthouse, Victor and Lydia Harlow planned tomorrow's victories. Their daughter Mia slept safely, their mission expanded, and their love deepened. They had taken revenge as fire and forged it into purpose, proving that sometimes the greatest victory isn't in destroying one's enemies, but in building something they can never touch. The phoenix had risen, and with each life rebuilt, each family restored, each victory won, justice, Victor had proved, could build as well as break. And in the end, that was the greatest revenge of all.